What if the pain of being invisible was actually the gift you didn't know you needed? Most people spend their entire lives chasing appreciation, performing, proving, pouring themselves out for others, hoping that someday someone will finally see them. But here's the truth nobody wants to hear. The moment you stop being appreciated is the moment you get the chance to wake up, not to who they think you are, but to who you've always been underneath all that trying. This isn't about becoming cold or shutting people out. It's about something far more powerful, realizing that your worth was never theirs to validate it. The pain you're feeling right now, it's not breaking you, it's breaking you open. And on the other side of that crack is a version of yourself you've been avoiding, stronger, clearer, and finally free from the need to be seen by people who were never really looking. This video isn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It's about what happens when you stop explaining yourself and start living for yourself. When you turn that energy inward and discover that the person you've been searching for in their eyes has been waiting in the mirror all along. And it starts with understanding why being unseen hurts so deeply. There's a specific kind of wound that doesn't bleed, but cuts deeper than most. It's the wound that comes when someone looks right through you, not with malice, but with indifference. You've given your time, your energy, maybe even pieces of yourself you didn't know you could spare. And yet, nothing. No acknowledgement, no gratitude, just silence. This isn't about needing praise or validation from everyone around you. It's about that moment when the mirror cracks and you see yourself standing alone in a room full of people who never truly saw you at all. Eastern philosophy calls this the beginning of awakening. The first sting that forces you to question everything you thought was real. The psychology of pain teaches us something vital. Emotional pain isn't a flaw in the system. It's the system working exactly as it should. When you feel unseen, your nervous system is trying to tell you something. It's saying, hey, something here isn't aligned. But most people don't listen. They numb it. They justify it. They tell themselves stories like, maybe I'm being too sensitive, or maybe I didn't do enough. And so they keep giving, keep performing, keep hoping that if they just try a little harder, someone will finally notice. But here's the thing. Mindfulness begins the moment you stop running from that discomfort and start asking, why does this hurt so much? Picture a river flowing steadily toward the ocean. It doesn't ask the stones to appreciate its journey. It doesn't pause to demand recognition from the trees along its banks. It simply moves. But when a dam is built, when something blocks its natural flow, the river doesn't become weaker, it becomes still. And in that stillness, pressure builds. That's what happens inside you when appreciation is withheld. You're not weak for feeling it, you're human. The pain of not being appreciated is the dam that forces you to stop, to look inward, and to confront a question you've been avoiding. Am I living for them or for me? This is shadow work in its rawest form, facing the parts of yourself that craved external validation so desperately that you forgot your own worth. Let's get practical for a second. Think about the last time you went out of your way for someone, covered their shift, listened to their problems for hours, helped them move, organized something they cared about. Now ask yourself, did they remember? Did they reciprocate? Or did they just move on? If you're honest, you'll probably find a pattern, and that pattern reveals something important. It's not that people are inherently ungrateful, it's that they'll only value what you teach them to value. If you keep showing up without boundaries, without self-respect, without ever saying no, then your presence becomes background noise. The sword that never rests loses its edge. The temple that's always open loses its sacred space. Suffering and awakening often arrive together because pain is the teacher that won't let you ignore the lesson anymore. And here's where it gets tricky. You can't unsee this. Once you've felt that first sting, the shock of realizing you've been invisible, you can't go back to pretending everything's fine. You can't keep playing the same role because now you know. The ego wants to fight back. It wants to look at me, see what I've done, but that's not the path forward. That's the path that keeps you trapped in samsara, the endless cycle of seeking approval and never finding peace. The real question isn't, how do I make them see me? The question is, why did I need them to see me in the first place? When words fail to reach someone, silence becomes the most articulate response. But this isn't the silence of defeat or passive aggression. It's something far more profound. It's the silence of detachment, the kind that comes from realizing you don't owe anyone an explanation for your worth. In Buddhism, there's a teaching about right speech. Say what's true, what's kind, and what's necessary. But what happens when none of those three conditions can be met? What happens when the person in front of you isn't listening anyway? That's when strategic silence enters, not as punishment, but as protection. It's the moment you stop trying to convince someone of your value and start embodying it instead. The mind-body connection responds immediately. Your nervous system finally exhales. Most people mistake silence for weakness. They think it means you're hurt or broken or too afraid to speak up. But those who've walked through the fire of emotional pain understand differently. Silence isn't absence. It's presence concentrated into its purest form. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop justifying yourself to people who've already made up their minds, something shifts. The energy you were pouring outward, trying to be seen, trying to be understood, begins flowing inward instead. And that's where the real transformation happens. Zen philosophy teaches us that the quietest rivers run the deepest. Your silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've chosen not to waste anymore. Think about the last argument you had where you knew, really knew, that no matter what you said, it wouldn't matter. Maybe it was with a family member who dismissed your feelings, or a friend who always turned your pain into their drama, or a partner who heard your words but never listened to your heart. You probably exhausted yourself trying to explain, trying to make them understand. And afterwards, you felt drained, resentful, small. That's because you gave your power away through words that fell on deaf ears. Now imagine if, in that same moment, you'd simply said nothing. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Not because you couldn't speak, but because you realized they couldn't hear. That's Wu Wei, effortless action through non-action. That's the power that disarms the ego, both theirs and yours. Here's what happens when you embrace strategic silence. People get uncomfortable. They're used to your reactions, your explanations, your need to be understood. When you withdraw that energy, they feel it. Not because you're trying to manipulate them, but because absence speaks louder than any argument ever could. In Taoism, there's a concept called the uncarved block, the idea that before we shape ourselves to fit others' expectations, we exist in a state of pure potential. Strategic silence is how you return to that state. You stop performing, you stop proving, you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. And in that space, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear yourself again. The inner stillness that was drowned out by all that noise finally surfaces. But let's be clear, this isn't about becoming cold or emotionally unavailable. It's about spiritual transformation through discernment. It's about recognizing that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, and that's okay. The people who truly value you won't need an essay to understand your silence. They'll feel it. They'll respect it. They'll give you space or step closer with genuine curiosity, not entitlement. Strategic silence is a boundary without walls, a door that closes softly but firmly. And as you practice it, you'll notice something. The drama decreases, the clarity increases, and the quality of your connections deepen. Because now you're no longer available for relationships that require you to diminish yourself. And that realization, that's just the beginning of what happens when you stop explaining yourself to those who were never trying to understand you in the first place. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to make yourself understood by someone who's already decided not to listen. You've been there, choosing your words carefully, speaking slowly, offering examples, sharing your feelings with vulnerability. And yet, no matter how clearly you communicate, it's like throwing stones into a bottomless well. No echo, no response, just silence. or worse, deflection, dismissal, distortion of what you actually said. This isn't a communication problem, it's a willingness problem. And here's the hard truth that trauma healing eventually reveals. Some people don't misunderstand you. They understand perfectly. They just don't care. The psychology of pain shows us that the wound isn't in being misunderstood. It's in continuing to explain yourself to someone who's chosen not to understand. Self-awareness arrives when you recognize the pattern. You notice that you're always the one trying harder, clarifying more, bending over backwards to be seen accurate. Meanwhile, the other person, they're comfortable with their version of you, the version that fits their narrative, that doesn't challenge them, that doesn't require them to look at themselves. In Buddhism, there's a teaching about the 5 hindrances, and one of them is doubt. Not just doubt in others, but doubt in yourself. Every time you over-explain, you're actually reinforcing a belief that says, maybe I'm not clear enough, maybe I'm the problem, but you're not. The problem is that you're trying to plant seeds in concrete and wondering why nothing grows. Let's get practical. Think about someone in your life right now. Maybe they're still around, maybe they're not, who constantly misinterprets your intentions. You say you need space, they hear rejection. You set a boundary, they call you selfish. You express a feeling, they make it about themselves. Now ask yourself, how many times have you explained the same thing to this person? 5 times? 10? 20? If you're being honest, you've probably had the same conversation in different forms over and over again. That's not communication. That's you hoping that if you just find the right words, they'll finally get it. But here's what shadow work teaches. People hear what they're ready to hear. And some people, they're not ready. They may never be ready. And that's not your responsibility to fix. The ego hates this realization because it feels like giving up, like admitting defeat. But it's actually the opposite. It's reclaiming your power. When you stop explaining yourself to those who don't want to understand you, you're not being cold or dismissive. You're being wise. You're recognizing that your energy is finite, sacred, and not meant to be poured into bottomless containers. Think of it like this. If you had a rare, precious medicine that could heal, would you waste it on someone who keeps throwing it away? Or would you save it for those who truly need it, including yourself? Impermanence reminds us that time is limited. Every moment you spend justifying your existence to someone who's already judged you is a moment stolen from your own growth, your own peace, your own journey toward enlightenment through pain. And here's the shift that changes everything. When you stop explaining, you start living. Your actions become your statement. Your presence becomes your proof. You no longer need anyone's approval or understanding to move forward because you've given that value to yourself. This is ego dissolution at its core, the death of the part of you that needed to be right, to be understood, to be seen as good by everyone. In its place, something stronger emerges. The version of you that knows your worth isn't up for debate. The people who matter will see you clearly without 1,000 explanations. The people who don't, well, they were never really looking anyway. And as you step into this truth, you'll feel something surprising. Not bitterness, but lightness. Because you're finally free from the exhausting task of trying to control how others perceive you. And that freedom, it opens the door to something you've been avoiding for far too long. The moment you decide to set a boundary, something inside you hesitates. There's a voice, quiet but persistent, that whispers, what if they get upset? What if they think I'm being difficult? What if I lose them? That voice isn't weakness, it's conditioning. You've been taught, either directly or through experience, that your needs are negotiable, that keeping the peace is more important than keeping yourself intact. That saying no makes you selfish, difficult, or unloving. But here's what Eastern philosophy has known for centuries. A boundary isn't a wall, it's a threshold. It's the sacred space between where you end and someone else begins. And when you finally impose one, clearly, firmly, without apology, you're not pushing people away. You're teaching them how to stand at the right distance. The psychology of pain reveals this. Guilt is often just old programming trying to keep you small. Let's talk about what boundaries actually look like in real life. It's not about grand declarations or dramatic exits. It's simpler than that. It's saying, I can't take that call right now, and actually not taking it. It's deciding you won't engage in arguments that go in circles, and then staying silent when someone tries to bait you. It's recognizing that you don't owe anyone your time, your energy, or your emotional labor just because they want it. Think about the last time someone crossed a line with you. Maybe they showed up unannounced, demanded your attention during your rest time, or made comments that left you feeling diminished. Did you speak up? Or did you smile, swallow your discomfort, and tell yourself it wasn't a big deal? That's where the damage happens. Not in the boundary being crossed, but in you ignoring that it was crossed at all. Here's the truth that mindfulness eventually reveals. Guilt is a compass pointing toward where you've been taught to betray yourself. Every time you feel guilty for setting a boundary, you're bumping up against an old belief system that says your value comes from how much you tolerate, how much you give, how little you ask for. But that's not love. That's not connection. That's emotional erasure dressed up as kindness. In Taoism, there's the concept of non-attachment, letting go of outcome, letting go of control. But non-attachment doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means you're so rooted in your own worth that you don't need their approval to stand firm. The sword isn't cruel when it cuts through illusion. It's simply doing what it was made to do. Now, some people will test your boundaries the moment you set them. They'll push back. They'll guilt trip you. They'll call you changed or different or not the person you used to be. And they're right, you're not. Because the version of you who had no boundaries was slowly disappearing, piece by piece, under the weight of everyone else's expectation. Setting boundaries without guilt is an act of self-awareness and spiritual transformation combined. You're saying, I see what's been happening here, and I'm choosing differently now. And yes, some relationships won't survive that shift. Some people were only comfortable with you when you had no limits, no voice, no line they couldn't cross. Suffering and awakening walk hand in hand here, because losing those connections hurts, but staying in them would have destroyed you. But here's where it gets powerful. The more you practice boundaries without guilt, the more you realize you're not losing anything real. You're shedding what was never meant for you. You're creating space for relationships built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. You're learning that detachment isn't cold, it's clarity. It's knowing that people who truly value you won't make you feel bad for honoring yourself. And the ones who do, they were never really there for you. They were there for what you could give them. Inner stillness comes when you stop negotiating with people who don't respect your peace. It comes when you finally understand that you're not responsible for managing other people's emotions, and that their discomfort with your boundaries is theirs to work through, not yours to fix. And as this truth settles into your bones, something else begins to crack open. Something you've been carrying for far too long that's finally ready to fall apart. There comes a moment, often sudden, sometimes slow, when the mask you've been wearing finally cracks. Not the mask you put on for strangers, but the deeper one. The version of yourself you created to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe. The one who always said yes. The one who absorbed everyone else's moods. The one who made yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. You didn't even realize you were wearing it because you've had it on for so long. But then something happens. A final disrespect, a betrayal, an offhand comment that shouldn't hurt but does, and suddenly you can't do it anymore. The pleasing persona doesn't fade gracefully, it collapses, and in that collapse, shadow work begins in earnest. Because now you're standing face to face with the person you actually are, not the person you thought you needed to be. The psychology of pain teaches us that breakdowns are often breakthroughs in disguise. When your pleasing persona collapses, it feels like failure, like you've lost control, like everything you've worked to build, relationships, reputation, the image of being the good one, is crumbling. But here's what ego dissolution really means. It's not the death of you, it's the death of the false self. the constructed identity that was never sustainable in the first place. Think about it. How much energy have you spent trying to anticipate what others need? Reading rooms, managing emotions that aren't yours, twisting yourself into shapes that don't fit just to avoid conflict or rejection. That's exhausting. And eventually, your system says, enough. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to stop pretending. Let's get real for a second. You know that feeling when you've been the mediator in your family, the therapist friend in your group, the reliable one at work who never complains. You probably told yourself it made you valuable, indispensable, but deep down, there was always a quiet fear. If I stop being this person, will they still want me? And that fear is precisely what kept the persona alive. In Buddhism, this is called clinging, attachment to an identity that brings suffering. You weren't just pleasing others, you were clinging to the belief that your worth depended on their approval. But samsara, the cycle of suffering, continues as long as you refuse to see the truth. You were never meant to sacrifice yourself to earn love. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's a transaction, and you're finally seeing the receipts. When the pleasing persona collapses, people around you will notice, and they won't all like it. Some will say you've changed, and they'll mean it as an accusation, not a compliment. Others will distance themselves, confused by your sudden unwillingness to play the old role. A few might even get angry, demanding to know why you're being difficult now. But here's the thing, these reactions aren't about you. They're about them losing access to the version of you that served their needs without question. This is where spiritual transformation gets uncomfortable, because you're not just losing relationships, you're discovering which ones were real to begin with. The people who stay, who adjust, who respect your evolution, those are your people. The ones who leave or punish you for having boundaries, they were only ever invested in who you pretended to be. And here's what nobody tells you about this collapse. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because you don't know who you are without the performer. Liberating because you finally get to find out. The space left behind by the pleasing persona is empty, but it's not a void. It's potential. It's the uncarved block from Taoism, the raw material of your actual self waiting to be discovered. You start noticing things, what you actually like, not what you said you liked to fit in, what you actually believe, not what you echoed to avoid judgment, what you actually want, not what you convinced yourself was enough. This is trauma healing at the deepest level, reclaiming the parts of yourself you buried to survive. And as you sit in this uncomfortable, uncertain space, you realize something. You don't need to rebuild the persona. You need to let it stay dead, because what comes next requires you to walk away from everything that no longer fits, and to do it without looking back. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes when you stop announcing your exits. No long explanations, no final confrontations, no dramatic speeches about how you've been wronged. You just leave, quietly, completely. And the people who took you for granted, they don't even see it coming. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's the result of 1,000 small moments where you realized your presence wasn't valued, your voice wasn't heard, your energy wasn't reciprocated. In Zen philosophy, there's a teaching about right timing. The flower doesn't apologize when it blooms, and the leaf doesn't explain when it falls. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is walk away without warning, because every warning you've given before was ignored. Detachment isn't about anger. It's about finally respecting yourself enough to stop waiting for someone else to change. Most people think walking away requires some big moment, a fight, a betrayal, a line crossed so dramatically that leaving becomes justified. But that's not how it usually happens. More often, it's subtle. It's the realization that you've been emotionally gone for months, maybe longer, while still physically present. You stayed because you hoped things would shift, because you believed loyalty meant endurance, because you feared the guilt of leaving. But here's what the psychology of pain revealed. Staying in something that diminishes you isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. And the moment you truly see that, not intellectually, but in your bones, walking away becomes non-negotiable. You don't need their permission. You don't need closure. You don't need them to understand. You just need to go. Let's talk about what this looks like. Maybe it's the friend who only calls when they need something, and you finally just stop answering. No explanation, no confrontation, just quiet distance. Or the family member who's been emotionally manipulative for years, and you stop showing up to gatherings that drain you. Or the romantic partner who's been taking you for granted, and instead of another tearful conversation that goes nowhere, you simply start building a life they're not part of. This is Wu Wei, effortless action that looks like inaction. You're not fighting, you're not forcing, you're simply withdrawing your energy from places it was never appreciated. And that withdrawal, it speaks louder than any words ever could. People feel it, they sense the shift, but by the time they notice, you're already gone. Here's the part that challenges most people. Walking away without warning feels wrong, because we've been conditioned to believe we owe everyone an explanation, that we need to give people one more chance, that leaving without a detailed breakdown of why makes us the bad guy. But shadow work asks you to examine that belief. Who taught you that your departure needs to be justified? Who convinced you that you're responsible for managing someone else's feelings about losing access to you? The truth is, if someone valued you, you wouldn't have reached this point. If they were paying attention, your silence wouldn't be a surprise. It would be the loudest thing you've never said. Suffering and awakening converge here. The pain of staying finally outweighs the fear of leaving, and that's when you know you're ready. The people who lose you without warning often react in predictable ways. Some will suddenly reach out, confused, asking what happened, as if the months or years of neglect weren't answer enough. Others will get defensive, painting you as cold or unreasonable for not giving them a chance to fix it. A few might even try to guilt you back, reminding you of the good times, the history, the bond you once shared. But here's what inner stillness teaches. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they suddenly realized you're gone. Impermanence is the nature of all things, relationships included. And when you walk away without warning, you're not being harsh. You're honoring the truth that was there all along. They lost you long before you left. The door closed in your heart quietly, gradually, every time they chose not to see you. And now, you're simply aligning your actions with that reality. Because what comes next isn't about them anymore. It's about you finally living for yourself, without apology, without hesitation, and without anyone who made you feel invisible. When you finally redirect your energy inward, something shifts. It's not selfish, it's necessary. For so long you've been pouring yourself into people, situations, and dynamics that gave nothing back. You've been the one who showed up, who cared, who tried. But now you're done performing for an audience that wasn't even watching. Living with purpose doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers or a perfect plan. It means you stop waiting for permission to prioritize yourself. It means you take all that energy you've been scattering outward and bring it home. Eastern philosophy calls this returning to center, the place where clarity lives, where your true self isn't shaped by others' expectations. Mindfulness begins when you realize that your life isn't a side project, it's the main event, and it's time you started treating it that way. Here's what happens when you shift your focus to yourself. You start noticing what actually matters to you. Not what you've been told should matter, not what looks good on the surface, but what genuinely lights something up inside. Maybe it's that creative project you've been putting off because there's no time, except there was always time, just never for you. Maybe it's your health, your body, the temple you've neglected while taking care of everyone else's needs. Maybe it's learning something new, building something meaningful, or simply resting without guilt for the first time in years. The mind-body connection awakens when you stop fragmenting yourself across 100 different obligations and start moving with intention. This is Wu Wei in action, effortless flow that comes when you're finally aligned with your own path, not someone else's agenda. let's get practical. What does living with purpose actually look like day to day? It's waking up and asking, what do I need today? Not, what does everyone else need from me? It's setting aside time for things that nourish you, reading books that expand your mind. Try Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, or The Way of Zen by Alan Watts if you're searching for depth. Moving your body in ways that feel good, creating something with your hands, sitting in silence without filling it with distractions. It's saying no to invitations that drain you, even if people don't understand. It's investing in yourself, whether that's therapy, a course, a skill, or simply the discipline to show up for your own growth every single day. Self-awareness grows when you stop running from yourself and start getting curious about who you are when no one's watching. This is where spiritual transformation gets real, because focusing on yourself isn't about becoming isolated or cold. It's about becoming whole. When you live with purpose, your presence changes. You're no longer scattered, reactive, or desperate for validation. You become grounded, calm, clear. People notice, not because you're trying to be noticed, but because there's a quiet strength in someone who's no longer available for chaos. You're not chasing anymore, you're building. And that shift is magnetic in a way performance never was. In Buddhism, this is called right livelihood, living in a way that honors your values, your energy, your truth. You're no longer handing pieces of yourself to people who won't even remember your name. You're pouring into the one relationship that will define everything else, the one you have with yourself. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you focus on yourself, the less you need from others. That desperate hunger for appreciation, it fades. The need to be seen, validated, understood by people who never could, it loses its grip, because you're finally giving yourself what you were begging them to provide. This is ego dissolution at its purest, not the destruction of self, but the death of the false dependencies that kept you small. You realize that your worth isn't a debate, your value isn't up for vote, and your purpose doesn't require anyone's approval. Inner stillness settles in, detachment becomes natural, and as you continue walking this path, quietly, purposefully, focused, you start to discover something unexpected. You're not just surviving without their appreciation anymore. You're thriving because of its absence, because that pain, it woke you up. And now you're finally awake enough to see what's been waiting for you all along. There's a quiet revolution that happens when you stop waiting for applause. You've been doing the work, showing up, growing, healing, building. But somewhere in the back of your mind, there was still that small hope. Maybe now they'll see. Maybe now they'll recognize what I've done. But then, nothing. And instead of collapsing under that silence, something unexpected happened. You realize you don't need it anymore. The validation you were seeking externally, you've started giving it to yourself. This is enlightenment through pain, the understanding that your achievements don't require an audience to be real. The river doesn't stop flowing because no one's watching. The mountain doesn't shrink because no one climbs it. And you don't become less because others fail to acknowledge what you've overcome. This is the moment you stop performing your growth and start living it. The psychology of pain reveals something crucial here. Seeking recognition is often a trauma response. It comes from moments in your past when your efforts were ignored, when your wins were minimized, when you learned that love was conditional on achievement. So you kept achieving, kept proving, kept hoping that the next thing would finally be enough. But enough for who? Them or you? Shadow work forces you to confront this. If you're still measuring your success by someone else's reaction, you're still giving them power over your peace. Value your achievements because they're yours. Because you survived when it would have been easier to quit. Because you chose growth over comfort, truth over performance, yourself over their approval. That's the achievement that matters. Not the one they see, but the one you feel. Let's talk practically. Think about the last significant thing you accomplished. Maybe you finished a difficult project, overcame a fear, set a boundary, left a toxic situation, learned a new skill, or simply made it through a day that tried to break you. Did you celebrate it? Or did you downplay it because no one else seemed to care? Most people do the latter. They achieve something meaningful and then immediately diminish it because the recognition didn't come. But here's what mindfulness teaches. Your achievements don't need external validation to count. Start a practice. Write down your wins, no matter how small they seem. Not for social media, not to show anyone, but for you. Keep a journal where you acknowledge yourself. Look in the mirror and say, I did that. I'm proud of me. It feels awkward at first because you're not used to being your own cheerleader. But that awkwardness, it's just old conditioning dying. In Taoism, there's a teaching about the uncarved block, the idea that true value exists before it's shaped by external forces. Your achievements are like that. They have inherent worth before anyone validates them. You don't need a promotion to know you worked hard. You don't need praise to know you showed up with integrity. You don't need recognition to know you've transformed. The sword is sharp whether or not anyone witnesses its edge. The temple is sacred whether or not anyone enters. And you're valuable whether or not anyone acknowledges it. This is non-attachment at its deepest, releasing the need for outcome, for reactions, for proof that you matter. You matter because you exist. Your growth matters because you lived it, and that's enough. Here's the shift that changes everything. When you value your achievements without expecting recognition, you become unshakable. Criticism doesn't devastate you because you're not seeking approval. Silence doesn't wound you because you're not waiting for applause. You move through life with a different energy. Not arrogant, but assured. Not desperate, but grounded. People might notice eventually. They might even come back and say, wow, you've really changed. Some. But by then, their opinion won't hold the weight it once did, because you've already given yourself the recognition that matters most. This is spiritual transformation complete. The realization that you were never meant to live for their validation. You were meant to live for your own becoming. Suffering and awakening have walked you here, through pain and doubt and silence, to this exact place where you finally understand that the most important witness to your life isn't them, it's you. And as you stand here, fully present in your own worth, you realize something profound. You're finally free. So here you are, standing in a place you never thought you'd reach. The pain of not being appreciated brought you here, not to bitterness, but to clarity. Not to isolation, but to wholeness. You've walked through the fire of being unseen, and instead of burning, you transformed. You learned that silence can be power, that boundaries aren't cruelty, that walking away doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. And most importantly, you discovered that your worth was never up for debate. The question now isn't whether they see you. The question is, do you see yourself? Do you recognize the person you've become through all of this? The one who stopped performing, stopped shrinking, stopped waiting for permission to exist fully? That person is real. That growth is real. And it doesn't need anyone's applause to matter. Here's what most people won't tell you. You'll carry this lesson for the rest of your life, not as a wound, but as wisdom. The pain of not being appreciated didn't destroy you. It initiated. It showed you who stays when the performance ends. It revealed what you're capable of when you stop living for validation and start living for purpose. And now you move differently. You choose differently. You love differently, starting with yourself. So ask yourself this. Are you still seeking their recognition? Or have you finally given it to yourself? Are you still explaining your worth to people who refuse to listen? Or have you stepped into the quiet power of knowing who you are without their approval? And most importantly, are you ready to keep walking this path, even when it's lonely, even when it's misunderstood, even when no one's watching? Because the truth is, you've already proven everything you needed to prove, not to them, to you. If this video resonated with something deep inside you, if it reflected a truth you've been feeling but couldn't name, then stay. There's more here. More paths like this one. More teachings that won't coddle you, but will wake you up. You've come this far. Don't stop now.